to this globalized corporate control. Okay? Again, so benefits aren't good or bad, but we need to have that one, they're a free will consent, and two, if we do make that decision, we're willing to pay the price. And that's why no one can ever tell you that it's a good or bad one, because it has to be a personal choice. So let's go and sort of wrap this element of income tax up in simplicity before we move on to the cause of it all, is the simplicity of the truth. Okay, about your rights as a natural person, how they're recognized in a common law nation. This comes from Levine versus Inland Revenue Commission from the House of Lords in England in 1928. Canada is, how do you say, a byproduct of English law. Okay, so the principles of law, even though some maybe statutories or different statutes are different on particular details, the principles of law, of common law, are the same. And so this is on, out of that case, it goes, it is trite law that His Majesty's subjects are free, if they can, to make their own arrangements so that their cases may fall outside the scope of the taxing acts. They incur no legal penalties, and strictly speaking, no moral censure if, having considered the lines drawn by the legislature for the imposition of taxes, they make it their business to walk outside of them. Complete free will choice. The choice is, do you want to participate in an internal federal excise tax by, as a natural person, acting as a legal representative to carry on acting in a fiduciary representative capacity for one of their officers? It's a choice. It's not yes or no, good or bad. But believe me, it's a choice they're not willing to readily tell us. So, is income tax as certain as death? Well, unless we're willing to believe that a natural person acting in their private capacity can be deprived of their private property without the use of clear and unequivocal language in a statute that does not contain the required notwithstanding clause, then it would appear that income tax is not as certain as death and is nothing more than a hidden cost to participate in a federal government benefit program, the Canada Pension Plan. That's about as simple as you can take it down. For those who are interested, we can go very deep on that. Okay? So it brings us to the question then. So what is the real reason behind income tax? Okay? Here are some common knowledge or common things we all hear. Go out and ask your friends and neighbors, what's the real reason for income tax? I guarantee you, probably number one you'll hear is to pay for the roads. What about the roads? Okay, the roads and all the infrastructure. Another one, and these are in one essence justifiable responses. If all we've ever done was educate ourselves through the TV, which they control. Okay? Two, to pay for social services. Now that's a very moral high ground. Who would not be willing to give of themselves to help someone else? That's a heartstring puller, isn't it? Is that a reality? Maybe we should say, forget about this legal thing. Let's just all volunteer to pay half of our property over as natural persons. If this was a reality, maybe we should consider it from that. Or three, here's probably a more probable one, to pay the interest on the money our government borrowed from the private bankers instead of issuing it to itself without interest. What wins? 1, 2, or 3? Okay, unanimous 3. Okay, well let's look at that. Here is, there's some great work done by a retired high school teacher by the name of Bill Abram. He has a lot of clips and links on the internet. And here's one chart that he has on there. And I thought it showed so much of the relationship about income tax to the private bankers and the interest. Okay, here's the accumulated amounts from the federal government accounts. It's a 14-year period between 1981 and 1995. Notice the parallelism? Well, here's a real simple thing. If we were able to move the $428 billion of interest that we paid to the private lenders, do you think we would need income tax? Okay? During that 14 period of time, they collected $619.2 billion accumulative. During that time, they paid out $428.2. You remove this, what's the need for that? Okay? What that ends up being is a $191 billion difference over a 14-year period, which ends up being $13.6 billion per year. When you deduct the cost to administrate agency to seek and destroy citizens of this country, that's cynical. When you deduct all the costs to just maintain the structure, there's virtually nothing left. It's a wash. So it's only here for one reason. To pay these private bankers who have acted as pirates and taken our country hostage. Okay? It can't be expressed more clearly than in Canada's 1993 Auditor General Report. It goes, the cost of borrowing in the third area that affects the annual deficit in 1991-1992, the interest on the debt was $41 billion. This cost of borrowing and its compounding effect have a significant impact on Canada's annual deficit. From Confederation, 1867, okay, up until 1991-92, the federal government accumulated a net debt of $423 billion. Of this debt, at that time, $37 billion represented the cumulative shortfall in meeting the cost of government programs since Confederation. We, according to this, are only $37 billion in debt since Confederation. Everything else, okay, the remainder, the $386 billion, represents the amount the government has borrowed to service the debt created by previous annual shortfalls. Here's a picture. It's a much clearer visual representation. Okay? There it is. There's a pie of our national debt. Those who are concerned that if we told the truth about income tax, we wouldn't have any social services? $37 billion. Do you realize, I think, GST alone collects more than that. Okay, we're talking in a country that has hundreds and hundreds of taxes. We got one tax alone that would cover the overcost of borrowing. Everything else is for what? For somebody else. Okay, and that is why they created this elaborate game to get money out of your pocket so it can go in theirs and keep you frustrated as there's nothing we can do. Okay? Here's this other chart from Bill Abrams. I believe he's the one that put it together, and it's all sourced from Statistics Canada. It was a very good chart. And as I was listening to him and going through it, I started doing some research, chronological research as when events happened in life. And sometimes that allows us to get a really big picture of what's going on. So one thing I added to is this dotted blue line on this side was the introduction of the Bank of Canada, the passing of the Bank of Canada Act. And the reason there was effort put towards that was because Canada was still reeling from the depression of the late 1930s, late 1929. That recession, the Great Depression, as it was called, was actually contrived and executed by the private bankers. I know, I can tell by the nods, I'm singing to the choir in this room on that. Okay? Okay? But from 1935, because of the pressure on the nation at that point, they introduced the Bank of Canada and got government funding from there. And what that did, it started pulling the country out of the Depression. Okay? What I did along here was started looking at what events happened along here and to look at it from one perspective. Okay? 1942 was the middle of the World War II. Do you see any economic spike in our debt? Absolutely nothing. How are we able to finance a world war right in the middle of it without having an economic spike? Why? Because we borrowed it from ourselves without interest. Take a look further in history. 1944, we introduced the Family Allowance Program. There's a very nice humanitarian-based social program. Was there a spike in our debt? Absolutely none. How did we do it? Again, we borrowed it interest-free from our own bank. 1952, old age security. Very humanitarian. We've taken care of the children, we've taken care of the elderly. Old age security, 1952. Was there a spike? Absolutely none. Again, why? We borrowed it from ourselves interest-free to finance these programs. 1954, the St. Lawrence Seaway. Probably a multi-billion-dollar project. Was there a spike in our debt? Absolutely none. How did we do it? Again, because we can borrow from the Bank of Canada to fund infrastructures without placing ourselves into debt. Okay? 1966, the universal health care. Boom, where's the spike? Another humanitarian program. So between the St. Lawrence Seaway and this was this whole time frame, there was just too much happening. Schools, universities, hospitals, everything. To develop a very strong humanitarian-based nation, and boom, no spike at all. Absolutely no spike. 1967, Canada Pension Plan was passed. Now, after we explain this relationship to CPP and income tax, let's take a look at this here and see if we can find some logical reason for this. If we already had an old age security program in this country, which did not take money out of your pocket to receive benefits from it, which was funded again by the natural resources of this country, then explain to me why we would need a Canada pension plan, which effectively is the same thing, an old age security plan, during 67? There's literally no logical reason if your motives were pure. But they